It also really puts both Denmark and Greenland in a box were Russia or China to make advances, because if they even gave them a small opening, the United States would say, wait a minute, I thought you said Greenland wasn't for sale. And we would have every right to defend Greenland's independence. So actually, President Trump is positioning the situation quite well.
Now, don't take Donald Trump literally, but do take him seriously. That is the standard advice for world leaders, for anyone trying to understand America's wildly mercurial president. Now, I say wildly mercurial, though his most loyal supporters insist that every word and every deed is part of an intricate and brilliantly devised grand strategy. The deal maker who moves in mysterious ways, to adapt the old Christian hymn. Now, I've got to admit, I'm not entirely convinced. Turns out it is a good idea to sometimes take Trump seriously and sometimes literally. You need to do both. President Trump said he wanted to make Canada an American state. Everyone knows that's absurd, and last night he as good as admitted that he'd like it to happen, but it won't happen. Greenland is different. A Trump-led American takeover, maybe an equally absurd proposition, but 85% of Greenlanders tell pollsters they're not interested. The issue dominated the recent Greenland election, and now it's emerged that US intelligence agencies have been ordered to spy on Greenlanders to seek out political support for President Trump's ambition of making that Danish territory an American possession. So maybe easy to see why, as we've been discussing on Drive, European political leaders are worried and wary of crude interference in their politics from Trump's Washington. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be talking live to Gordon Sondland, Donald Trump's ambassador to the EU during his last administration, and later to the mother of the Canadian Parliament on the meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and the President last night. And after ruffling a few feathers in Munich at the beginning of the year, J.D. Vance has today been speaking in Washington about the US-Europe relationship.
We really want and we really care about Europe being self-sufficient. I gave an interview a couple of weeks ago where I actually tried to make the point that, yes, we're going to have disagreements with Europe and Europe will have disagreements with us. Sometimes, I would hearken back to 2003 United States policy in the Middle East. I frankly wish we had listened to our European friends, but I think this is an area where we're fundamentally right, and I think it's gratifying to see so many of our European friends recognize that and recognize that Europe does really have to play a bigger role in continental defense. I think we're all aligned on it. It's just a question of getting there and, most importantly, getting there quickly.
So there's the Vice President feeling pretty good about Europe seeing the light, about the need for greater spending and greater self-defense and mutual defense among Europeans. And maybe he's got a point about that bit of the argument. We can welcome Gordon Sondland, Donald Trump's ambassador to the European Union during his first administration. Ambassador, welcome.
Good evening. How are you, John?
I'm well, and thank you for coming onto the programme. So this news overnight that the American intelligence agencies have been told to spy on the territory of a NATO ally with a view to some future takeover. In some ways it seems really outlandish, doesn't it? Maybe to some farcical. Is it serious? Does it matter to America's reputation in the world? And if so, how?
Well, let's put things into perspective. First of all, I think it was despicable that someone in the intelligence community leaked this. This is official U.S. policy to task intelligence agencies to gather information, and that absolutely should not have been leaked. If people don't agree with the policy of Donald Trump, they should resign. They shouldn't be leaking to the media. But to go back to your earlier question, it's been known for years that both Russia and China have their designs on Greenland for various reasons. There's no reason why the U.S. shouldn't as well. And the interesting thing is, as the Danes and the Greenlanders thwart President Trump's overtures to build a closer relationship, whether it's a takeover or not, is yet to be seen. It also really puts both Denmark and Greenland in a box were Russia or China to make advances, because if they even gave them a small opening, the United States would say, wait a minute, I thought you said Greenland wasn't for sale. And we would have every right to defend Greenland's independence. So actually, President Trump is positioning the situation quite well.
Okay, so I can perfectly well comprehend your argument that America would have an interest and a wish to have control over over Greenland. You know, one presumes with the goodwill of the people of that country. But to hear President Trump, Ambassador, talking about, well, military force and quite deliberately not ruling out the use of military force, that was it not, I suggest, rather astounding and in some ways worrying and in some ways offensive.
Well, it was taken offensively, and I understand why, but that's President Trump's probably his favorite troll is he never rules out anything.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it any less offensive, does it?
No, I understand that, but his policy is to never back himself or the United States into any kind of a corner. For example, if Russia were to make a military move on Greenland,
yes,
and now the United States, in order to keep Russia out of Greenland, never mind the independence of Greenland, to keep Russia out of Greenland, if we were now to stage a counteroffensive against Russia, would that be a military takeover of the United States of Greenland by the United States? Or would it be simply protecting Greenland? And he wants to leave all of those options open.
But surely that's a false, surely that is for the sake of this discussion, surely that's a false dichotomy. Because if Russia were to invade Greenland, which is a possession of Denmark, which is a member of of NATO, under Article 5 of the NATO treaty, we would all be obliged as NATO members to come to the defence of that NATO territory. And that would not be seen as aggression against Greenland. It would be seen as defence of Greenland. That is a simple, straightforward calculation, surely.
Well, it is and it isn't, because I could see certain NATO members arguing that Greenland is a bridge too far. It's one thing to protect Denmark. It's another thing to protect Greenland. So the United States is positioning itself in an area where it has a vital national security interest, as President Trump said, not just for itself, but for the world, to be in a position to hopefully make some kind of a closer, friendly relationship with Greenland that involves economic aid, it involves additional military installations, and certainly the rare earths on Greenland. But, you know, he goes about things sometimes in a very inelegant way.
Yes.
But I get his point.
Okay, you understand his point, and you can rationalize the thinking in the White House. It also seems you understand the offense that's been taken by some of these points and how it challenges just conventional ideas of the way partners and allies behave towards each others. I mean, I still find it almost impossible to conceive of America launching a military operation against Greenland. For one thing, where would that leave NATO and the NATO treaty? And we do have an agreement between NATO partners of mutual self-defense. Would other NATO members be obliged to fight America? That is surely absolutely inconceivable.
John, let me give you another perspective that takes into account Greenland. It takes into account tariffs. It takes into account all sorts of things. What President Trump is tired of is incessant talking and meetings and discussions and white papers and studies that accomplish nothing. No one cares, no one reads them, and nothing happens. And in doing the things that he's done in the past 100 days, he is activating the world to focus on issues that need focus, and they need execution. And execution means you check your watch, not your calendar. And that's been President Trump's number one impetus for doing a lot of these things. Yes, it breaks a lot of China, to pardon the pun. But it also creates immediate action on the part of countries that are used to dealing in time frames of decades, not in hours.
There's a lot of people that can understand in very broad terms the idea of getting on and doing something rather than just talking about it. But there surely are, I put it to you just for the sake of argument, there are lines to be drawn, lines not to be crossed. And when you, Ambassador, as a former diplomat operating in Europe, when you hear the serving vice president attacking the mainstream parties and leaders of Europe and saying that the way they're handling their own cultures and their own democracies on issues such as what he calls freedom of speech, he says he said at Munich, that is a greater threat than Putin in Russia. Well, surely it is not a greater threat than Putin in Russia. That was an extraordinary thing to say. It
was an extraordinary thing to say, and it had its intended effect. he got the conversation going. And the conversation is bigger than his speech in Munich. It's about self-defense. It's about Europe finally shrinking from a nanny state and becoming more independent,
Yes.
more forward-leaning, and a lot of those, those sorts of things. And by stirring the pot the way he did, yes, he pissed off a lot of people at the Munich Security Conference,
Yes.
but now he's got Germany thinking about greater defense spending, France thinking about greater defense spending, and letting the Europeans stand on their own so that we can use our resources to deal with China, which is the far bigger threat than Russia.
Yeah, I mean, the Vice President and the President have succeeded in spurring the European members of NATO into action in terms of spending more, thinking more, planning more for their own defence, and that has to be a positive development. It has achieved something, but at the same time, relationships in NATO and across the transatlantic alliance, they have been strained. They are perilously close to breaking point. And if you care about that alliance, if you care about Western security, if you care about America, then that can't be a good thing.
I don't believe they've been strained. I don't accept the premise of your point, John. I think they've been strained for public consumption because I think leaders have to act offended when someone is saying something that offends them. On the other hand, the intelligence cooperation between our country and those who are allegedly offended has never been higher. Our military cooperation has never been higher.
Yes.
There are discussions going on at all kinds of levels. So this is far more transactional than the Europeans would lead you to believe.
Okay, well, last question, only because we have run out of time. So when you see that leaders in Europe, including the new Chancellor of Germany, but he isn't the only one, talking about a need for a greater independent agreement on mutual defence in Europe, excluding or going beyond America, because they now argue publicly and to some extent, generally, that America is no longer a reliable ally. That is not a good thing to hear from an American or from anyone else, is it?
Well, I think it's a good thing in the sense that finally America is not always the rich daddy that's writing the check and fixing the problem. You have some very, very rich, sophisticated countries within the 27 member states that are more than capable of defending themselves with or without America's help, I might add.
Yeah.
I think America is always going to be an important component to that. But Europe would want America to be able to shift a lot of the resources that it's currently directing toward European defense against the Asian theater. And I think that would benefit Europe and the rest of the world. So it's a good thing at the end of the day.
All right. Ambassador Gordon Sondland, former American ambassador to the European Union, thank you so much for joining us, as always. Now, we've got a good deal of passionate discussion and debate on the programme this afternoon. If there was anything in the ambassador's thoughts there that might have caused you a little bit of offence, some strong language, apologies to you for that. But I'm sure you appreciate this is sensitive stuff that we're talking about.